The siren on the pearl-white golf cart was a high-pitched mosquito whine that set my teeth on edge, but the woman behind the wheel was screaming louder. Eco-terrorism. It's a Class S violation. Officer, arrest this man immediately. I didn't move. I just leaned against my blue plastic bin, crossing my arms over a work shirt that still smelled faintly of diesel and 20 years of other people's secrets. At my feet, 30 houses worth of overstuffed garbage bags were piled 5 feet high, blocking the grand oak doors of the Serenity Palms clubhouse. It was a beautiful, rotting monument to suburban rebellion, and it was leaking a slow, rhythmic trail of coffee grounds onto the pristine Saltillo tile. Karen, our HOA president, the self-appointed queen of aesthetics, was vibrating so hard her designer visor was rattling against her forehead. Her hand flew to the brim, giving it a sharp, frantic snap that echoed off the stucco walls. It was her tell. It meant she was lying. She was panicked, and she knew I'd finally found what she'd been burying at the bottom of the bin. "Morning, Karen," I said, my voice low and steady, the way it used to be when I had to tell a shop owner they were getting a city fine for dumping grease in the storm drain. "I thought you'd be happy. Since you've been billing us $4,000 a month for extraordinarily heavy waste, I figured it was time we actually showed you some." The police officer looked at the mountain of trash, then at the gray-haired man in the scuffed work boots, and finally at the woman whose sanctuary was currently being suffocated by the very filth she'd spent years trying to pretend didn't exist. "You're just a garbage man," she shrieked, her face the color of a bruised plum. I took a slow sip of my coffee and smiled. "That's the mistake you made, Karen. You thought the man who takes out the trash doesn't know exactly what's rotting inside the bag." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the one thing she'd tried to burn. She didn't know it yet, but in this neighborhood, the Tuesday morning pickup was about to become a permanent life sentence. Today's story is from Joe White, a man who spent 20 years hauling away the secrets people were too ashamed to keep and learning that a person's bin tells a much truer tale than their bank account. After 2 decades of the pre-dawn grind and the rhythmic groan of a hydraulic lift, he thought he was finally retiring to the manicured silence of a luxury HOA, only to discover that some suburban messes require a professional touch and a very thick pair of work gloves to truly clean up. Before we dive in, please do me a favor and smash that like button now, and comment below on what you would have done if you were in Joe's situation. Would you have sold your farm to the developer and moved somewhere else? Or would you have fought some other way? Let me know in the comments below. I've spent 20 years hauling away the things people are too ashamed to keep. You can tell everything you need to know about a person by the weight of their bin and the way they bag their secrets. I've seen the mountain of empty scotch bottles in the dry January households and the frantic hand-shredded credit card offers in the driveway of a guy driving a leased Ferrari. After 2 decades of 4 a.m. shifts, the rhythmic hydraulic groan of a Mack truck, and the permanent scent of diesel and overripe citrus etched into my pores, I thought I'd earned a little silence. I used my late father's inheritance to buy into Serenity Palms. It was supposed to be my victory lap, a beige-on-beige sanctuary where the only thing I'd have to lift was a morning coffee. The brochure promised unparalleled tranquility, which, in my experience, is usually code for neighbors who watch you through closed blinds. I was barely 3 hours into my move, halfway through a stack of boxes labeled kitchen, when the silence was punctured by the high-pitched, mosquito-like whine of an electric motor. I stepped out onto the driveway, wiping a streak of dust across my forehead, and saw a pearl-white golf cart screech to a halt. It had a custom gold-leaf plaque on the front that read, "President." The woman behind the wheel didn't get out. She sat there like a tank commander, wearing a white sun visor so stiff and wide it looked like a riot shield. Her skin was the color of an expensive handbag, and her eyes were hidden behind oversized, mirrored sunglasses that reflected my own tired face back at me. "Joseph, isn't it?" she asked. Her voice had the artificial, cloying sweetness of a diet soda. "I'm Karen, president of the Serenity Palms Homeowners Association. Welcome to the neighborhood. We were surprised to see your application go through so quickly." She reached into a wicker basket on the passenger seat and held out a small lemon bundt cake wrapped in crinkly cellophane. "A little something to help you settle in. We really value aesthetic harmony here, Joseph. We like to think of ourselves as a family, and families have standards." "It's just Joe," I said, taking the cake. It felt suspiciously light, like it was made of more air than flour. "And thanks." I'm just trying to get the boxes in before the clouds break. Don't want the cardboard getting soggy on the drive. Of course, she said, her smile remaining perfectly static. Moving is such a cluttered process. It's quite a change from the municipal sector, I imagine. She paused. Her hand drifted up to the brim of her visor. She gave it a sharp, nervous tug, snapping the plastic against her forehead. It was a quick, jagged motion, like a gambler checking their cards. It's just, she continued, her tone shifting from welcoming committee to prosecuting attorney in a heartbeat. We've noticed your bin. It's currently 2 inches past the white curb line. Article 4, Section 3 of the bylaws is very specific about the encroachment of waste receptacles on common visual planes. That's a Class A violation. I looked down at the plastic bin. It was sitting exactly where any sane person would put it to make life easier for the guy on the route. It's out for the morning pickup, Karen. It'll be gone in a few hours. I'm just trying to stay ahead of the curve. The sweetness evaporated instantly. The visor tug happened again, snap, tighter this time. In Serenity Palms, we don't leave things out. We adhere to the precision schedule. Your placement is unsightly. It suggests a lack of discipline that we simply don't tolerate. If it isn't corrected in 60 seconds, I'll have to log the first fine. $100 to start. She checked a digital stopwatch clipped to her dashboard, her manicured thumb hovering over the button. And Joseph? She added, her eyes narrowing behind the mirrors. I did a little reading on your background. Sanitation? We'll expect you to be especially diligent. We wouldn't want you bringing those industrial habits into our sanctuary. This isn't a landfill. It's a legacy. She didn't wait for a thank you. She whirred away, the golf cart tires chirping on the pristine asphalt. I stood there holding a cheap, dry cake, staring at a bin that was suddenly the most expensive 2 inches of real estate I'd ever owned. I looked at the house she'd come from. Hashtag 12, a sprawling place that looked a little too perfect, like a movie set. Most people would have been intimidated. But I'd spent 20 years looking at the things people tried to hide in the dark. And as I watched her adjust that visor one last time before disappearing into her garage, I knew the smell of a cover-up. Karen thought she was the one doing the inspecting. She didn't realize that I'd been trained by the best to spot the rot before the bag even broke. Old habits don't die. They just shift their schedule. 20 years of waking up before the sun has a chance to burn off the city's exhaust means my internal clock is set to a permanent 4:30 a.m. alarm. Most people in Serenity Palms were probably dreaming about their golf handicaps or the specific shade of mulch they wanted for their flower beds. I was already on my second cup of black coffee, sitting on my porch in the pre-dawn gray, watching the mist crawl over the manicured lawns like a guilty secret. At 5 a.m. sharp, I heard it. Not the familiar, deep-chested rumble of a city-grade Mack truck, but the higher, whinier pitch of a private contractor. Elite Disposal. The name alone told me they charged 3 times the municipal rate for half the work. I set my mug down and walked toward the edge of the driveway, staying back in the shadow of my garage. The truck rounded the corner of the cul-de-sac, its headlights cutting through the fog. I noticed it immediately, a dark, shimmering trail on the asphalt behind it. Hydraulic fluid. It was a slow leak, probably a blown seal on the lift arm. A rookie mistake, and a mess that would eat through the aesthetic harmony of the street in a week if they didn't patch it. The truck bypassed the first 3 houses on the block and pulled up directly in front of number 12, Karen's house. I expected the usual routine, the mechanical arm reaching out, the clatter of the bin, the grunt of the engine, but the arm stayed tucked. Instead, the driver killed the engine. The silence that followed was heavy. A side door on Karen's house creaked open. She stepped out, but the president was missing her visor. Her hair was pulled back in a tight, panicked knot, and she was wearing a silk robe that looked like it cost more than my first truck. She wasn't carrying a bin. She was lugging a heavy, rectangular box, the kind used for reams of legal paper, wrapped in so much silver duct tape it looked mummified. She didn't put it on the curb. She walked it right up to the driver's side window. I saw the driver lean out, a young guy with Elite embroidered on his neon vest. They exchanged a few hushed words. Karen reached into the pocket of her robe and handed him something small and flat. Even from 30 yards away, I knew the look of a folded $20 bill. In my world, that's a special favor. You pay the driver a little extra to take the stuff the city won't touch, industrial chemicals, old tires, or things you don't want sitting in a landfill with your name on the mail. The driver hopped out, grabbed the mummified box with a grunt. It was clearly heavy, and tossed it directly into the hopper at the back of the truck. He didn't cycle the Packer blade. He just left it sitting there, buried under a few loose bags. Karen stood on her pristine lawn, watching the truck pull away. Her hand drifted up to her forehead, fingers searching for the visor that wasn't there. She looked small for a second, her shoulders slumped, her eyes darting toward the dark windows of the neighboring houses. She was drowning. I could smell the ozone of her panic from across the street. People don't pay special favor prices at 5:05 a.m. to dispose of kitchen scraps. They do it to make sure something disappears before the sun comes up. I stayed in the shadows until her front door clicked shut. Then I walked out to the curb. I knelt down and touched the dark streak the truck had left behind. I rubbed the hydraulic fluid between my thumb and forefinger. It was gritty, old, and smelled like neglect. Elite Disposal was cutting corners, and Karen was paying them to play along. "Morning, Joe," a voice rasped from the darkness. I jumped, nearly slipping on the oil. It was my neighbor from number 40, an older guy named Artie, who looked like he'd been carved out of driftwood. He was standing on his porch, a cigarette glowing in the dark. "You see that?" Artie asked, nodding toward Karen's house. "The truck?" I asked, playing it cool. Artie took a long drag and exhaled a cloud of smoke that joined the mist. "She's been doing that every Tuesday for 6 months. Heavy boxes, no bins. And our HOA waste management fee just went up another $50 last month. She says it's inflation. I say it's a racket." He looked at me, his eyes sharp. "You're the new guy, the one she's already been barking at about the curb line. Just a word of advice. Don't look too close at the trash in this neighborhood, Joe. Some of it's buried pretty deep." I looked back at the oil slick on the road. "I'm a sanitation man, Artie. Looking at trash is the only thing I'm actually good at." I went back inside, but I didn't go back to sleep. I grabbed a notepad and a pen. I didn't have my route map anymore, but I knew how to build a paper trail. If Karen wanted to find me for 2 inches of plastic, I was going to find out exactly what she was hiding in those heavy taped up boxes. Because in this game, the person who holds the bag usually ends up smelling like the garbage. The $100 fine hit my inbox at 8:01 a.m. It wasn't a polite reminder. It was a formal PDF titled Notice of Non-Compliance, Immediate Action Required. There was even a grainy photo attached, taken from a high-angle security camera, showing my bin sitting exactly where it had been during our chat. It looked like a mugshot for a piece of plastic. Karen didn't just want the $100. She wanted to establish a hierarchy. She wanted the trash man to know that in Serenity Palms, she held the clipboard and I held the bag. I didn't reply. I didn't call to complain. Instead, I waited for the afternoon heat to settle in, the time of day when the retirees are tucked away in the central air and the golf carts are plugged into their chargers. I grabbed a pair of thick nitrile gloves from my old work kit and a mesh laundry bag, then took a scouting stroll toward the community clubhouse. It was a sprawling Mediterranean-style building with a fountain out front that probably cost more than my first house. But I wasn't interested in the architecture. I was interested in the service enclosure tucked behind a screen of oversized hibiscus bushes. In every HOA, there's a central dump. It's where the official waste goes, the clubhouse trash, the pool filters, and most importantly, the paper trail from the HOA office. The enclosure was locked with a heavy-duty chain, but the gate had a gap at the bottom that was just wide enough for a man who knew how to compress his shoulders. I slipped inside, the familiar, sour-sweet scent of sun-baked refuse hitting me like a greeting from an old friend. There were 4 industrial-sized bins, 2 for landfill, 1 for recycle, and 1 marked confidential, shred only. The shred bin was overflowing. It was a rookie mistake. People think a locked bin means the contents are gone, but if you don't schedule the pickup often enough, the paper starts to bloom over the top. I reached in and pulled out a handful of confetti. This wasn't professional crosscut shredding. This was a cheap, home office strip cutter. To a guy who spent 20 years piecing together who's cheating on their taxes by the mail they toss, this was a Sunday crossword puzzle. I filled my laundry bag with the bloomed strips and slipped back out through the hibiscus. Back in my garage, I cracked a beer and cleared off my workbench. I laid out the strips, thousands of thin white ribbons of paper. Most of it was junk, invitations to sunset sangria mixers and complaints about the pool temperature. But then I saw a consistent pattern, a heavy, cream-colored bond paper with a distinct blue ink. I started taping. An hour in, I had a corner. K Management Services. 2 hours in, I had a date. August 14th. 3 hours in, I had the number that made my stomach turn. $4,200. It was an invoice for strategic aesthetic consulting. The address for K Management wasn't an office building. It was a P.O. box in a town 3 counties over. I sat back, the beer gone warm in my hand. I looked at the Elite disposal invoice I'd pulled from the same pile. Our monthly waste fee had doubled in 6 months, and yet the truck was leaking oil and the driver was taking special favors in the dark. I looked at the blue ink on the taped-together K Management invoice. It matched the signature on the welcome card Karen had tucked into that dry lemon cake. The K in K Management was a loop-de-loop that looked exactly like the K in Karen. She wasn't just managing the neighborhood. She was billing the neighborhood for the privilege of her own consulting. I looked at the $100 fine sitting on my phone screen. She was nickel and diming the residents for Class A violations while she was hauling out five-figure consulting fees through a shell company. Suddenly, my hand drifted up to my own forehead. I didn't have a visor to adjust, but I felt the itch. I realized then that Karen wasn't just overbearing and petty. She was a professional. She'd turned the HOA into her personal piggy bank, and she was using the rules to keep everyone else too busy looking at their own curb lines to notice the vault was being emptied. 2 inches, Karen? I whispered to the empty garage. You should have worried about the 2 miles of paper you left behind. I grabbed another roll of tape. I had a lot more puzzles to solve before Tuesday's pickup. Tuesday morning rolled around with the sky the color of a bruised plum. I didn't wait for the sun. I was out on my porch by 4:45 a.m., dressed in my old, faded Navy work shirt, the one with the city sanitation patch ripped off, leaving only a ghost thread outline of where I used to belong. The Elite disposal truck turned the corner, its hydraulic leak leaving a fresh, iridescent rainbow on the damp asphalt. As it screeched to a halt in front of number 12, I didn't stay in the shadows this time. I walked straight down my driveway, a thermos of industrial-strength coffee in each hand. Karen's front door opened a crack. I saw the flash of her silk robe, but she froze when she saw me standing there. She didn't come out with her taped-up box. She just hovered in the darkness of her foyer, a pale ghost watching through the sidelight window. The driver hopped out of the cab, looking haggard. He was a kid, maybe 22, with dark circles under his eyes that suggested Elite wasn't paying him enough to care about his own health, let alone a hydraulic seal. Rough morning for a leak, I said, nodding toward the puddle forming under his lift arm. He jumped, nearly dropping his clipboard. Who are you? You can't be out here during collection. Safety hazard. Relax, kid. I spent 20 years behind the wheel of a Mac MR draw. You've got a blown O-ring on the secondary bypass. If you don't shim it soon, you're going to lose pressure halfway through the route. He blinked, his defensive posture softening into pure exhaustion. Tell me about it. Boss won't fix it. Says aesthetics come before maintenance. I'm running 3 hours behind. I handed him one of the thermoses. Drink. It's better than the sludge at the gas station. He took a hesitant sip, his eyes widening. Man, that's life-saving. I'm Sal. Joe? I said. I glanced toward Karen's house. She was still there, a silhouette behind the glass. Rough stop at number 12? I see you doing this special pickup every week. That's a lot of heavy lifting for one house. Sal looked toward Karen's window, then leaned in close, his voice dropping to a whisper. Man, don't even get me started on the queen. She pays $20 a box to bypass the bin. Says it's sensitive architectural waste, but I'm the one who has to heave it. It feels like she's disposing of lead weights. Sensitive architectural waste? I asked, my internal BS meter hitting the red zone. In a taped-up legal box? Yeah. And she's specific. I'm supposed to take him straight to the regional incinerator. No landfill, no sorting. Just burn it and forget it. She even asks for the burn receipts sometimes. I looked at the hopper. There was a box from last week that hadn't quite cleared the packer blade. The silver duct tape was peeling back in the humidity. I could see the edge of the contents. It wasn't architectural waste. It was reams of thermal printed paper, the kind used for ledger books and old-school bank registers. That's a lot of paper to burn, Sal, especially for a neighborhood that prides itself on being green certified. She doesn't care about green, Joe. She cares about gone. Sal took another gulp of coffee and climbed back into the cab. Look, I gotta move. If she sees me talking to you, she'll report me to my supervisor. She's already got half the company on speed dial. One more thing, Sal, I said. leaning on his door. Does she ever mention a company called K Management? Sal's hand froze on the gear shift. He didn't look at me. He just stared straight ahead through the cracked windshield. I don't know nothing about no management. I just pick up the boxes, Joe. I'm just trying to keep my job. He slammed the truck into gear and roared away, the hydraulic fluid spraying a fine mist onto the curb. I turned back toward my house. Karen was standing on her porch now. She wasn't in her robe anymore. She was in her full presidential regalia. The crisp white polo, the khaki shorts, and that damn visor. She was adjusting the brim, tugging it so low I couldn't see her eyes, but I could feel the heat of her stare. She marched down her driveway, her golf cart key jingling like handcuffs. Joseph, she barked. Interfering with a service contractor is a Class B violation. You were observed impeding the flow of essential utilities. That's another $50. I didn't flinch. I just held up my empty thermos. Just being neighborly, Karen. The kid's truck is leaking. I thought you'd be worried about the aesthetic of an oil slick on your pristine cul-de-sac. She stopped, her hand snapping to the visor brim. Snap. The maintenance of the contractor is not your concern. Your concern is your garden. I've received reports that you've been planting non-approved vegetation in your rear lot. It's a tomato plant, Karen. It's 6 inches tall. Food-producing flora are prohibited under the Rodent Prevention Act of our bylaws, she snapped, her voice rising an octave. She looked over her shoulder, her eyes darting toward number 12, as if checking to see if Sal had left anything behind. You have 24 hours to sanitize your yard, or I'll have a professional crew do it for you. And trust me, Joseph, you won't like the bill. She turned on her heel and retreated toward her cart, her movements jerky and frantic. She wasn't just a petty tyrant anymore. She was a woman who knew the trash man was starting to look inside the bags, and she was terrified of what I'd find at the bottom. I watched her go, my mind racing. Sal was taking her records to the incinerator, and she was paying him under the table to bypass the trail. But she'd forgotten one thing about my old job. The incinerator doesn't open until 8 a.m. Sal had 3 more hours of stops, and I knew exactly where his route ended. The morning sun was just starting to bake the dew off the Serenity Palm sign when I saw Karen's golf cart crest the hill. She'd been out on her morning compliance patrol, a low-speed hunt for a stray blade of grass or a wind-blown napkin she could transform into a $50 invoice. I was waiting for her, not hiding this time, but standing right on my property line, leaning on a garden spade. At my feet was a small, defiant patch of dark soil where I'd just tucked in 3 heirloom tomato starts. She didn't even park in her garage. She swerved the cart onto the grass, her own grass, a clear Class C violation, not that she cared, and marched toward me. Her visor was pulled so low it looked like she was peering out from an armored slit. Joseph, I thought I was clear, she shrilled, her voice cracking the morning quiet. Food-producing plants are an invitation to vermin. I have the rodent prevention citation already drafted. Pull them, now. I didn't move. I just looked down at the tiny green leaves. They're Brandywine tomatoes, Karen. My dad grew in best flavor you'll ever find. Seems a shame to call something that brings life vermin. I don't care about your father's hobbies. She stepped closer, the scent of expensive lily-of-the-valley perfume clashing with the faint, lingering smell of Sal's hydraulic fluid on the street. Her hand shot up to her visor. Snap. She adjusted the brim with a sharp, jagged tug. This is a controlled environment. We don't do earthy here. We do order. If those aren't gone by noon, I'm calling the master gardener for a forced extraction. I leaned on the spade and looked her dead in the eye. I let the friendly neighbor act drop. My voice went low, the way it used to when I had to tell a shop owner they were getting a city fine for dumping grease in the storm drain. You know, Karen, I was thinking about order this morning and waste. She froze. Her hand stayed on the brim of her visor, fingers twitching. I noticed the HOA budget has a line item for extraordinarily heavy waste removal. I continued, my tone conversational but sharp. $4,000 a month. That's a hell of a lot of trash for a place this size. You'd have to be clearing out a small factory every week to hit those numbers. The color drained from her face, leaving her tan looking like a coat of cheap paint. She adjusted the visor again. Snap, snap, a frantic double tap. That's an administrative necessity. We have high standards for disposal. Professional shredding, hazardous mitigation. Funny thing about professional shredding, I interrupted. It usually happens on site. Big truck, loud grinders. Everyone sees it. But Sal? He told me he's taking taped-up legal boxes straight to the regional incinerator, bypassing the scales, bypassing the logs, billed directly to the general fund as miscellaneous maintenance. Karen's chest was heaving now. She looked like she wanted to scream, but the fear of a neighbor overhearing kept her jaw locked tight. You're making wild accusations, Joseph. You're a sanitation worker. You don't understand the complexities of managing a multi-million-dollar estate fund. This is about liability and proprietary data. I understand a special favor when I see one, Karen, I said, taking a step toward her. I held up the spade like a scepter. And I understand that the HOA is paying for someone's private heavy lifting. It almost looks like someone is dumping industrial files. Maybe old business records from a boutique that's bleeding cash? Maybe something a forensic auditor might find interesting? She stepped back, her heel catching on the edge of her own pristine lawn. For a second, the mask slipped. I didn't see the president. I saw a woman drowning in a sea of debt, clutching a plastic visor like a life preserver. Her eyes were wide, darting toward her house as if she expected the police to be waiting in her kitchen. Get off my property, she hissed, though I was still standing on my own dirt. I'm on my land, Karen, watching my tomatoes grow. I turned a clod of earth with the spade. You might want to check the bylaws on embezzlement of community funds. I think that's a bit higher than a Class A violation. I think the state calls that a felony. She didn't reply. She scrambled back into her golf cart, nearly clipping her own mailbox as she floored it into her garage. The heavy door slammed down with a bang that echoed through the cul-de-sac. I looked down at my tomatoes. They looked small against the backdrop of the sanctuary, but they had deep roots. Karen had fired the first shot with her bin placement fine, but I'd just returned fire with a thermal-guided missile. She knew I wasn't just a guy with a bin anymore. I was the guy who knew exactly where she was hiding the bodies, and I knew Tuesday was only 7 days away. The thing about being a garbage man is that nobody ever looks at you, but you see everything. We're like ghosts in neon vests. People talk on their cell phones about their affairs while I'm 3 feet away tossing their coffee grounds. They leave their bank statements sitting on top of the bin like a gift. After 20 years of being invisible, I knew exactly how to disappear in plain sight. I didn't use my truck for the stakeout. I used my old sedan, the one with the faded paint that blended into the gray asphalt of the industrial district. At 5:30 a.m. on Tuesday, I was parked 2 blocks away from the Regional Thermal Recovery Facility, the fancy name for the city incinerator. I didn't have to wait long. Sal's elite disposal truck rumbled into view, the hydraulic leak now a steady, rhythmic drip that left a dotted line of oil behind him. But he didn't pull into the main bay where the residential loads go. He veered off toward the side entrance of Ironclad Shredding and Disposal, a private facility that shared a fence with the burn plant. I pulled out my phone and hit record. Sal hopped out of the cab, looking even more rattled than he had on the curb. He didn't check the scales. He didn't sign a manifest. Instead, a man in a suit, a guy who looked like he'd never lifted anything heavier than a pen, stepped out of the office. They didn't use the mechanical lift. They did it by hand. Sal in the suit lugged 4 of those taped-up, heavy-duty boxes from the hopper. They weren't tossing them into a bin. They were feeding them directly into an industrial-grade cross-cut shredder that fed into the incinerator's intake chute. Zip, crunch, gone. I zoomed in on the boxes. One of them had a corner of silver tape peeling back. I caught a glimpse of a bright blue logo, a stylized K wrapped in a laurel wreath. K Management Services. I had the video. I had the location. Now I needed the why. I waited until Sal pulled away. Then I drove around to the main office of the incinerator. The manager there, a guy named Miller, owed me a favor from back in '08 when I helped him track down a wedding ring a city councilman's wife had accidentally tossed in the recycling. Joe, what are you doing out of the house this early? Miller asked, leaning on the counter with a donut in one hand. I thought you were living the high life in that fancy HOA. It's a little too high for me, Miller. Listen, I need a look at the commercial gate logs for Ironclad Shredding. Private account. Miller frowned. That's proprietary, Joe. I can't just hand that over. I'm not looking for secrets, Miller. I'm looking for a leak. That elite truck is dumping hydraulic fluid all over the county. If the EPA catches wind, this whole facility gets flagged for an audit. I just want to know who's billing the special runs so I can tell the driver's boss to fix his seals before the feds show up. Miller sighed, knowing I was technically right about the EPA. He tapped a few keys on his ancient computer. Let's see. Elite Disposal, Route 402. Special drop-off. Billed to Serenity Palms General Fund, Maintenance Liaison. How much? I asked. $1,600 for the morning. Marked as confidential document destruction, emergency status. I felt a cold prickle of satisfaction. Karen wasn't just hiding her own records. She was charging the neighbors for the privilege of burning the evidence of her theft. $1,600 a week, every week, for a year. That's $80,000 of the general fund gone up in smoke. I thanked Miller and walked back to my car. As I pulled out of the lot, my phone buzzed. It was an alert from the Serenity Palms community portal. Urgent, security alert. Unauthorized surveillance reported in the North Quadrant. Residents are reminded that private investigation of neighbors is a Class S violation. Violators will be prosecuted. Underneath the text was a photo of my car, taken by Karen's safety inspector, parked near the clubhouse the day before. She was spooked. The safety inspector wasn't there to keep the neighborhood safe. He was her lookout. She knew I was digging, and she was trying to build a cage of violations around me before I could bring the hammer down. I adjusted my rearview mirror and smiled. She was trying to fight a sanitation man with paper. She forgot that my job isn't just about moving the trash. It's about knowing exactly how much weight the truck can handle before it crushes everything inside. And Karen? She was about to find out she was way over the limit. The block party wasn't advertised in the Serenity Palm Sentinel. If I'd put it in the official newsletter, Karen would have had a SWAT team and a noise ordinance lawyer on my lawn before I could even light the charcoal. Instead, I did it the old-fashioned way. I talked to people at their bins. I caught Mrs. Gable while she was struggling with a heavy bag of kitty litter, and I lingered by Artie's porch while he was nursing his morning disgruntled silence. By 6 p.m. on Saturday, I had 12 neighbors sitting on mismatched lawn chairs in my garage. I'd pulled the big door down to ventilation height, just enough to let in a breeze, but low enough that Karen's golf cart patrols couldn't see who was inside. The air was thick with the smell of cheap burgers and high-octane anxiety. "Joe, what's this about?" Artie asked, leaning forward. "If Karen sees us all gathered here, she'll label it an unauthorized assembly. I've already got 2 strikes for my non-standard mailbox." "She can't fine us for eating burgers, Artie," I said, though I knew she'd certainly try. I walked over to my workbench and switched on a shop light. It illuminated the puzzle I'd been working on. The taped-together bank statements and the blue ink invoices for K Management. Beside them, I'd laid out the video stills from the incinerator stakeout, showing Sal and the suit feeding our HOA funds into the shredder. "Take a look," I said, stepping back. Mrs. Gable stood up, her floral print housecoat fluttering. She peered at the $4,200 invoice for strategic aesthetic consulting. "I don't understand, Joe. We pay for the gardeners. We pay for the pool. What's strategic consulting?" "It's Karen," I said. "K Management is a shell company. She's billing the HOA for advice she's giving to herself. And while she's doing that, she's charging us an extra $1,600 a week for heavy waste removal. That's our money, Mrs. Gable. That's the special assessment fee you had to pay last month." Mrs. Gable's face went pale. Her hand went to her throat. I had to cancel my cable. I've been eating canned soup for 3 weeks to cover that assessment. She told me the reserves were critically low because of the rising cost of petrol for the mowers. The room went silent. It wasn't the kind of silence you get in a sanctuary. It was the heavy, pressurized silence of a boiler right before the valve snaps. "She's been treating this place like a personal ATM," I said, my voice steady. "And she's using the trash fees to bury the receipts. She thinks because I'm a garbage man, I don't know how to read a ledger. But she forgot that I've spent 20 years seeing exactly how people try to hide their messes." "We should go to the police," a man from down the street muttered. "Not yet," I said. "She's got friends on the council. She's got a safety inspector who's really just a paid lookout. If we go to the cops now, the elite driver disappears, and the rest of the boxes in her garage get burned tonight. We need to make it impossible for her to hide." "How?" Artie asked, a grin finally spreading across his weathered face. "You want to dump a load of manure on her driveway? Because I've got a guy." "Better," I said. I looked at the pile of trash bags sitting in the corner of my garage. "We're going to hit her where it hurts. Her aesthetic harmony. Starting Monday morning, nobody puts their bin on the curb. No elite disposal. No special favors." "Then what do we do with the trash?" Mrs. Gable asked, looking scandalized. I leaned in. a slow smile spreading across my face. We bring it to her. If she wants to be the president of waste, we're going to give her exactly what she's been billing us for. Every bag, every bottle, every scrap. We're going to pile it right on the clubhouse steps. I saw the spark catch in their eyes. These were people who had been bullied, measured, and fined for years. They'd been told their curtains were the wrong white and their grass was an eighth of an inch too long. They were tired of being sanitized. We don't need a lawyer yet, I said, raising my beer. We need a rebellion. And in my experience, nothing starts a rebellion faster than a mess that won't go away. Just then, we heard the familiar whir of the golf cart outside. I saw the shadow of Karen's visor pass across the gap in the garage door. She lingered there for a long time, the electric motor humming with a low-frequency menace. She knew we were in here. She could smell the burgers, and she could definitely smell the change in the air. She snapped the brim of her visor. I heard the crack of the plastic through the door and sped off. Get your bags ready, I told the group. Monday morning, we're taking out the garbage. For real this time. Monday morning in Serenity Palms usually sounds like nothing at all. Maybe the distant thwack of a tennis ball or the polite hum of a sprinkler system. But this Monday, the air held a different kind of tension. It was the heavy, expectant stillness of a storm front moving in. I was out on my porch at 6 a.m. I didn't have a coffee mug this time. I had a clipboard and a pair of heavy-duty work gloves. One by one, the garage doors on my street began to groan open. It was like a synchronized awakening. Artie was the first, dragging 2 overstuffed black bags across his driveway. Then came Mrs. Gable, hauling a small kitchen bin with a look of terrified exhilaration on her face. By 6:15 a.m., 30 residents were marching toward the community clubhouse. We weren't shouting, we weren't chanting, we were just a silent procession of people who were tired of being measured. The clubhouse sat at the center of the neighborhood, a pristine temple of stucco and Spanish tile. We didn't leave the bags at the curb. We walked them right up the saltillo tile stairs and piled them neatly, professionally, even, directly in front of the heavy oak double doors. Joe, you sure about this? Artie whispered, dropping a bag of grass clippings onto the heap. This looks a lot like eco-terrorism if you squint at it. It's not terrorism, Artie, I said, adjusting the pile so it didn't spill into the decorative fountain. It's a delivery. We're just centralizing the assets. Isn't that what strategic consulting is all about? By 7 a.m., the pile was 5 feet high. It was a beautiful, chaotic monument of suburban waste. Egg cartons, Amazon boxes, grass clippings, and old magazines. The collective sins of a neighborhood that Karen had spent years trying to scrub clean. The whine of the golf cart started at 7:05 a.m. Karen didn't just drive up. She drifted the cart around the fountain, the tires screeching on the pavers. She leapt out before the motor even stopped. Her visor pulled so low she had to tilt her head back to see the top of the trash mountain. "What is this?" she shrieked. The diet soda sweetness was gone, replaced by the jagged edge of a broken bottle. "Who did this? This is a biohazard. This is a Class S criminal nuisance." She turned on the crowd of neighbors who were standing in a semicircle on the lawn. Her hand flew to her visor. Snap, snap, snap. A frantic, rhythmic staccato. She looked like she was trying to keep her head from exploding. "Joseph, I know this is you," she screamed, pointing a manicured finger at me. "I've already called the police. I've called the health department. You'll be in handcuffs before noon, and I'll have a lien on your house by sunset." "Morning, Karen," I said, stepping forward. I held up my clipboard. "We're just helping you out. Since the elite truck is so unreliable and the heavy waste fees are so high, we thought we'd bring the waste to the president. Save the contractor the trip, right?" "You are insane," she yelled. She reached into her cart and grabbed her safety inspector megaphone, her hand trembling so hard the plastic rattled. "Everyone return to your homes immediately. You are in violation of the Peaceful Enjoyment Act. Disperse or face immediate eviction proceedings." Nobody moved. Mrs. Gable actually took a step forward, clutching her bathrobe closed. "We want to see the receipts, Karen. We want to know why we're paying $4,000 a month for a pile that's sitting right here." Just then, 2 patrol cars from the local precinct rolled into the clubhouse circle, their blue and red lights reflecting off the mirrored sunglasses Karen was wearing. Karen practically tackled the lead officer as he stepped out. "Officer, arrest him. That man, the one in the work shirt, he's the ringleader. They've dumped hazardous materials on private property. I want them charged with everything: trespassing, vandalism, inciting a riot. The officer, a veteran named Miller, who looked like he'd seen 1,000 HOA disputes, looked at the pile of trash, then at the 30 quiet retirees standing on the lawn. "Ma'am, calm down," the officer said. "It looks like a lot of household garbage. Is this the community clubhouse?" "Yes, and I am the president," Karen barked, tugging her visor so hard it sat crooked on her head. "I want them gone." "Officer," I said, stepping toward them. I didn't look at Karen. I looked at the cop. "We're not trespassing. We're members of this association. We're just making sure the president sees the heavy waste we're paying for. Since she likes to personally supervise the special document destruction every Tuesday at the incinerator, we thought she'd want to supervise this too." Karen's face went a shade of purple I'd only ever seen on a bruised plum. Her hand went to the visor again, but this time the plastic brim gave way. Crack! The visor snapped right off the headband, leaving her forehead exposed and her eyes wide with a panicked animal light. "I don't know what he's talking about," she stammered, the tell finally failing her. He's a disgruntled former employee of the city. He's obsessed with trash." "Actually, officer," I said, reaching into my pocket and pulling out the video stills of the shredder drop-off, "we're just concerned about the elite driver. He's about to arrive for the scheduled pickup. Maybe we should ask him why he's been taking cash under the table to burn HOA records." The sound of a heavy diesel engine rumbled in the distance. Sal was right on time. Karen looked at the approaching truck, then at the cops, then at the mountain of trash blocking her sanctuary. For the first time in 20 years, I saw a person who realized they were the ones standing at the bottom of the bin, and the Packer blade was about to cycle. The air in the clubhouse circle was thick with the smell of old coffee grounds and the sharp, metallic tang of Sal's leaking hydraulic fluid. The elite disposal truck pulled up, its brakes squealing like a panicked animal. Sal killed the engine, but he didn't get out. He sat behind the wheel, staring through the windshield at the 2 police cruisers and the 5-foot mountain of garbage blocking the president's front door. Karen was vibrating. Without her visor, she looked exposed, her forehead pale and damp with sweat. She kept glancing at the truck, then at the officers, her hands twitching at her sides as if searching for a weaponized clipboard. "Officer, this is a private matter," Karen barked, her voice hitting a frantic, glass-shattering pitch. "The truck is here for a scheduled pickup. Clear these people out so we can restore order." Officer Miller didn't move. He looked at the truck, then back at the video stills I was holding. "Hold on, ma'am. Mr. Joe here is making some fairly specific allegations about special document destruction and unauthorized cash payments from the HOA General Fund. If that truck is involved in a felony-level embezzlement scheme, it's not a private matter anymore." Miller gestured for Sal to step out. The kid looked like he'd aged 10 years since 5 a.m. He hopped down from the cab, his neon vest stained with oil, his eyes darting toward Karen. She gave him a look, a sharp, cold glare that screamed, "Keep your mouth shut." And for a second, I thought the kid was going to bolt. "Son," Miller said, his voice calm but heavy, "Joe here says you've been taking taped-up boxes from number 12 directly to the ironclad shredder. He says you're bypassing the scales and taking $20 tips to keep the manifest clean. That sound about right?" Sal looked at Karen. She adjusted her hair, her fingers raking through the knot at the back of her head since her visor was lying in the dirt. "He's lying, officer," she snapped. "This boy is a professional. He follows the contract." I just do what the boss says," Sal stammered, his voice cracking. "And she's the one who called the office. She said it was hazardous litigation material. She said if I didn't handle it personally, she'd have my CDL pulled for the oil leak." "You little traitor," Karen shrieked. She lunged toward Sal, her manicured nails raking the air, but Officer Miller's partner stepped in between them. "Easy, ma'am," the younger cop said, his hand resting on his belt. "Let the man speak." Sal was shaking now. He reached into the cab of the truck and pulled out a battered logbook. "She paid me, okay? Every Tuesday. $20 for me, and she'd call in a maintenance credit to the company that covered the shredding fee. She said the neighborhood didn't need to see the boring paperwork." I stepped forward, reaching into the pocket of my work shirt. I pulled out the taped-together bank statement from Chapter 3, the one with the blue ink and the K management header. "Is this the boring paperwork, Karen?" I asked. holding it up so the neighbors could see. Because this looks like a $20,000 transfer from the Serenity Palms Reserve Fund to a P.O. box in Titusville, dated 3 days after you told Mrs. Gable we couldn't afford to fix the pool heaters. A low growl went through the crowd of neighbors. Artie stepped up beside me, his arms crossed. You told me my roof tiles were the wrong shade of terracotta, Karen. You fined me $300 while you were moving 20 grand into a shell company? Karen backed away, her heels clicking rhythmically on the pavers. Click, 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 like a countdown. She looked at the circle of angry faces, the police, and the mountain of trash that represented every petty rule she'd used to suffocate the neighborhood. You don't understand, she wailed, her voice finally breaking into a sob. The boutique was failing. My husband left me with nothing but the mortgage on number 12. I was borrowing it to keep the appearances up, for the good of the community. If the president's house goes into foreclosure, our property values plummet. I was protecting you. You weren't protecting us, Karen, I said, my voice as cold as a winter morning on the route. You were just making sure the bin looked clean while the bottom was rotting out. Officer Miller sighed and pulled out his handcuffs. Karen, I think you need to come down to the station. We're going to need to see those consulting contracts and every scrap of paper you haven't managed to burn yet. As they led her toward the patrol car, Karen looked back at the pile of garbage. She looked at the egg cartons and the grass clippings and the discarded magazines. Her sanctuary was buried under 30 houses worth of reality. It's unsightly, she whispered, a ghostly remnant of her old self. It's a Class A violation. No, Karen, I said, watching the cruiser door close. It's just a Tuesday pickup, and you're finally on the schedule. Sal looked at me, his face pale. What do I do with all this, Joe? I looked at the mountain of trash, then at the neighbors who were finally starting to talk to each other without whispering. Cycle the blades, Sal. Let's get this place cleaned up, for real this time. The police cruisers hadn't even cleared the front gate before the two board members who hadn't been in Karen's pocket, a retired actuary named Ben and a quiet architect named Sarah, called for an emergency session. They didn't need a quorum. They had a crime scene by Wednesday morning. The sanctuary was crawling with a different kind of specialist. No more bogus safety inspectors. Instead, we had a team from a forensic accounting firm out of the city. They looked like accountants, but they moved like detectives, carrying heavy-duty scanners and portable hard drives into the clubhouse office. I was sitting on the bench outside, still in my work gear, when Ben walked out. He looked 10 years older, rubbing his temples with a hand that was visibly shaking. It's worse than we thought, Joe, he said, sitting down beside me. A lot worse. He handed me a preliminary summary. I'm a trash man, not a CPA, but the red flags were screaming off the page in bold type. The ghost vendors. K-Management wasn't the only one. They'd found 3 other shell companies: Pristine Palms Landscaping, Azure Pool Solutions, and Serenity Security, all with P.O. box addresses that traced back to the same commercial mail center Karen used. The reserve fund hemorrhage, our long-term capital reserve, the money meant for new roofs and road repaving, wasn't just low. It had been hollowed out. Karen had been making manual journal entries at 2 a.m., moving blocks of $5,000 and $10,000 into operating expenses to cover the holes her own theft had created. The lifestyle gap. Sarah, the architect, had found the real smoking gun in the clubhouse files. Karen had used HOA funds to pay for a community anniversary gala that never happened. The $15,000 catering deposit had actually been a direct payment to a luxury European cruise line for a president's retreat she'd taken last summer. She wasn't just skimming, Ben whispered. She was cannibalizing the neighborhood to keep her own lights on. Another 6 months, and the association would have been insolvent. We wouldn't have been able to pay the electric bill for the streetlights. How did she think she'd get away with it? I asked, looking at the $4,000 heavy waistline item that was now highlighted in bright yellow. She relied on the one thing most people in places like this have too much of, Ben said. Pride. She knew nobody wanted to admit their perfect neighborhood was falling apart. She made everyone so afraid of a $50 fine for a weed that they were too scared to ask why their $500 monthly dues weren't fixing the potholes. The accountants had found a second set of books hidden in a password-protected cloud drive on the office computer. Karen had been keeping a meticulous log of every special favor she'd paid Sal, every bribe to the safety inspector, and every cent she'd borrowed. It wasn't a ledger. It was a confession. I looked toward number 12. There was a for sale sign in the yard, but it wasn't Karen's. It was the bank's. They'd moved faster than the police, serving a foreclosure notice the moment her name hit the local news. The audit is going to take weeks, Ben told me, standing up. But the DA already said it's enough for a racketeering charge. She's not coming back, Joe. I nodded, watching the forensic team carry another box of sensitive architectural waste, the stuff she hadn't managed to burn, out to their car. Karen had spent years trying to make sure everything in Serenity Palms was sanitized, but she forgot that the most dangerous kind of filth isn't the stuff you put in a bin. It's the stuff you try to hide behind a visor and a fake smile. I stood up and grabbed my thermos. I had a garden to water, and for the first time since I'd moved in, the air in the neighborhood didn't smell like a cover-up. It just smelled like rain. The morning Karen was served with the formal lawsuit. The sky was a flat, unforgiving gray. The kind of light that shows every crack in the pavement and every smudge on a window. There was no aesthetic harmony left in Serenity Palms today. Just the raw, cold reality of a neighborhood seeing itself clearly for the first time. The sprinklers were off, the golf carts were silent, and even the birds seemed to be keeping their distance from House Now towers. I was out front early, leaning against my big blue bin. I'd positioned it exactly where I liked it, 3 inches past the white curb line, bold and defiant against the pristine asphalt. It was a Class A middle finger to the bylaws. I was wearing my old work boots, the ones with the permanent scuffs from 1,000 lift gates, and I was sipping black coffee from a chipped mug that definitely wasn't Serenity Palms approved. A plain black sedan pulled up to the curb in front of Karen's house. Two men in cheap charcoal suits stepped out. They didn't look like HOA inspectors. They moved with the heavy, bored confidence of the county sheriff's office. They walked up the driveway, the same driveway where Karen used to measure my tire tracks, and knocked on the door. It wasn't the president's gavel knock she used to use. It was the heavy, rhythmic thud of a legal reckoning. The door opened just a crack. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw the flash of thick white paper as they handed over the envelope. It was a monster of a document. 100 pages of racketeering, embezzlement, and breach of fiduciary duty. It was the heavy waste she'd been trying to burn for a year, finally delivered back to her front door with a court date attached. 10 minutes later, the garage door groaned open. Karen didn't come out in her golf cart. She came out on foot, dragging a designer suitcase that looked like it was struggling to hold her life together. One of the wheels was stuck, scraping against the concrete with a shrill, metallic scream that set my teeth on edge. She wasn't wearing the visor. Without it, her face looked pinched and small, her eyes darting around the street as if she expected a firing squad. Her presidential polo was wrinkled, and that cloying lily-of-the-valley perfume was gone, replaced by the sour, sharp smell of a woman who hadn't slept in a week. She began loading her SUV, throwing bags into the trunk with a frantic, jerky energy. She didn't look at the houses. She didn't look at the manicured lawn she'd spent years obsessing over. She just wanted to go before the rest of the neighborhood woke up and saw the legacy she'd built dissolve into a trunk full of laundry. I pushed off from my bin and walked to the edge of my driveway. I didn't say anything. I just stood there, my arms crossed, watching the show. She slammed the hatch shut and finally looked at me. The hatred in her eyes was pure, concentrated, and entirely misplaced. She marched toward the edge of her lawn, stopping just inches from the property line, her fingers twitching as if she were looking for a non-existent clipboard. "You think you won, don't you?" she spat. Her voice was raspy, the diet soda sweetness replaced by pure battery acid. "You destroyed this place, Joseph. You brought your filth, your sanitation mentality, and you broke the only thing that made this neighborhood special. You're just a garbage man. You'll always be just a garbage man." I took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee, feeling the warmth of the ceramic against my palms. I didn't feel angry. I just felt the same way I did when I found a bag of maggots at the bottom of a bin on a hot July afternoon. It was just something that needed to be handled. "You're right about one thing, Karen," I said, my voice steady and low. "I am a garbage man, and after 20 years on the route, I've learned how to spot the difference between a neighbor and a nuisance. A neighbor helps you out when your bin is heavy. A nuisance just measures the distance to the curb." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a single yellow dandelion I'd plucked from my garden that morning. I held it up like a trophy before tossing it casually into my open bin. "You spent so much time measuring my grass and checking my curb line that you forgot the most basic rule of the route," I said, Stepping closer to the line she was so afraid I'd cross. If you let the rot sit in the dark for too long, eventually the whole house starts to stink. You weren't protecting our property values, Karen. You were just making sure the lid looked clean while the bottom was falling out. She opened her mouth to scream, but the words died in her throat. She looked at the dandelion sitting in the bin, then back at me. Her hand went to her forehead, fingers searching for the visor that wasn't there, the tell of a woman who had no more lies left to sell. She looked small. She looked like exactly what she was, a petty thief who had run out of time. And Karen? I added as she turned to her car, her shoulders slumped. Don't worry about the move-out inspection. I've already seen enough of your architectural waste to last a lifetime. I'll make sure the new board gets the bill for the hydraulic fluid you left on the street. She scrambled into the driver's seat and floored it. The tires chirped, a Class C violation, and she sped toward the gate, her president plaque rattling against the dashboard like a ghost. I stood there until the sound of her engine faded into the distance and the gate hissed shut behind her. Then, I walked over to my bin, flipped the lid shut with a satisfying thud, and wheeled it back toward the garage. I was Tuesday. The sun was finally breaking through the clouds, and for the first time in my life, the trash had taken itself out. The silence that followed Karen's departure wasn't the stifling, paranoid kind she'd spent years enforcing. It was different, lighter, like the air in a house after you finally open all the windows to let a fever out. 6 months have passed since the great dump at the clubhouse. The forensic auditors finished their work, peeling back the layers of Serenity Palms until they found every cent Karen had funneled into her boutique and her consulting fees. She's currently awaiting trial, trading her silk robes for a state-issued jumpsuit that I'm told is a very non-compliant shade of orange. The neighborhood had a choice to make. Ben and Sarah asked me to run for the board, but I turned them down. I've spent enough of my life dealing with other people's messes. I didn't move here to carry a clipboard. Instead, they created a new position, maintenance liaison. It doesn't come with a visor or a golf cart, but it does come with a vote on any service contract over $5,000. The first thing I did was fire Elite Disposal. We hired a local outfit, 3 brothers who keep their trucks clean and their seals tight. They don't take special favors, and they actually know how to hit a curb line without leaving a trail of oil. The HOA dues dropped by 40% in the first quarter. Turns out, when you aren't paying for a president's strategic aesthetics, things get a lot cheaper. I'm sitting on my porch now, watching the sun dip behind the tree line. My backyard isn't just a controlled environment anymore. The 3 tomato plants have turned into a full-blown garden. I've got peppers, basil, and a row of sunflowers that are definitely overbearing in the best way possible. I heard the familiar click-clack of footsteps on the sidewalk. It was Artie. He wasn't sneaking around in the shadows anymore. He was wearing a bright Hawaiian shirt that would have given Karen a stroke, carrying a bowl of Mrs. Gable's famous potato salad. "Hey, Joe," he called out, leaning on my fence, the one I'd painted a shade of blue that isn't even in the HOA handbook. "Board meetings tonight? Sarah wants to know if we should approve the new pool heaters or wait for the spring rebate." "Tell her to wait," I said, tossing him a ripe Brandywine tomato. "The rebate hits in April. No sense throwing money in the bin if we don't have to." Artie caught the tomato and grinned. "You're a cheapskate, Joe. A professional cheapskate." "I prefer the term resource recovery specialist," I replied. As Artie walked off, I looked down at my driveway. My bin was tucked neatly inside the garage, out of sight. Not because I was afraid of a fine, but because I liked the order of it. I've realized that a neighborhood isn't built on bylaws or Class A violations. It's built on the stuff people usually ignore. The quiet mornings, the honest handshakes, and the shared knowledge that we're all just trying to keep our corner of the world a little bit cleaner. The street is quiet now. No sirens, no megaphones, no snapping visors. Just the sound of the wind and the sunflowers, and the distant, rhythmic rumble of the Tuesday morning truck making its rounds 3 blocks away. I took a final sip of my coffee and leaned back in my chair. The trash man had finally found his sanctuary. And the best part? There wasn't a single bag left to sort. And that's Joe's story. And if you made it this far, I'd appreciate you dropping a like and maybe throw in a comment to let me know what other HOA stories you'd like to hear. Hope that you have a great rest of your day, and I'll catch you all next time.